Great to see so many of you. I'm used to seeing some of you on the Thursday night choir calls, and it's wonderful to see you again, and also all the people that I usually don't get to see. And so this is a wonderful thing, and hopefully sooner rather than later we'll be able to see each other face to face. So yes, here I am. Dan asked me to share. As you know, I'm a faculty member at the Juilliard School in New York City, and all this year, it's been a virtual experience for me. On Fridays and Saturdays, I spend the day in front of the computer, as I'm sure many of you do as well, and I'm teaching 2 classes and 6 private students. The 2 classes that I'm teaching, one is in improvisation, and learning how to improvise in a historical style, which is a big part of the early music movement. But the other one is called performance practice. It's a seminar class. Performance practice is trying to recreate the techniques and musical styles of the past in the historical performance movement. But it has gone much farther than that. We are trying to recapture attitudes. We're trying to recapture information, knowledge, and all kinds of matters of taste, which on the one hand, we can observe from the past, but on the other hand, we have to create for the present and also mold for the future. And so rather than having it be a nuts and bolts kind of fact-finding mission about how to do certain trills or ornaments or other things in the past, I've turned it into a way of trying to create an intellectual foundation for why are we playing music of the past today for people today. That there is a whole question of how it is that this music has suddenly become popular again. What about it is beguiling? How can we play it ever more beautifully? And so that is within the historical performance department of the Juilliard School. This semester, I have spent about half the time talking about social issues of social justice, examining what the world of the past was like and the world of the present, so that we can find ways as musicians and performers to offer diversity, to be as inclusive as possible, and to give shape to our vision for the future. As everyone knows, in the past 6 months or so, there has been a tremendous resurgence, or resurgence, I suppose you could say, of awareness around issues of systemic racism and white supremacy. That is no less true of the musical community. And there have been many articles written in the New York Times and other places about the lack of diversity in classical music today, which I think we can all agree is true, and to some degree, something that we need to every degree, we need to examine and find ways of understanding what brought us here and how we can go out of it and into a better future. So I'd like to start by reading the official statement of the Historical Performance Department at Juilliard. This is a statement that was jointly crafted by faculty, students, and administration, and now appears on the front page of everything that the school offers virtually to the world. The historical performance movement began as a revolution, a reimagining of musical conventions, a rediscovery of instruments, techniques, and artworks that inspire and teach us, and a celebration of diversity in repertoire. It is also a conversation with the past, a past whose legacy of racism and colonialism has silenced and excluded too many voices from being heard. We do not seek simply to recreate what might have been, but to imagine what should be. We embrace Juilliard's values of diversity, equity, and inclusion through voices heard anew and historical works presented with empathetic perspectives. And we reject discrimination, exclusion, and marginalization. We recognize that we study and work on the traditional homeland of those who preceded us, as stated in Juilliard's land acknowledgement. I'll just sort of stop and say a sidebar that the school has found out which original people lived on the land in the Upper West Side of New York City, and is honoring them in going forward. We are committed to collaborations with scholars and performers from a diverse range of viewpoints and backgrounds, and we seek to share the music we love so much in active engagement with the community around us. We invite you to laugh if you feel so moved, to clap whenever you feel inspired, to find solace and joy in this music, as we continue the ongoing innovation of the historical performance movement. Thank you for joining us. This slide is shown on the first thing of any virtual performance and is on the front page of the website. That having been said, that's the framework of what I've been doing. I'm going to today give a little deeper exploration into the ways in which we've been doing this.
Showing. It's just our names.
I'm sorry? Okay. I thought that what I have done is create a Google Drive folder that has a number of the readings that I've given them and links to the websites as well, so that you can maybe between now and next week have a little homework to be able to read and see these things. Some of them are more lighthearted than others, but they do have to do with the question of what is music in our culture, in our society, in our world today, particularly what is classical music, and what attitudes and norms do we exist among, and what could we do to examine them, find what we can with them, and again, imagine a better future. I will also say that next week, just as a little tidbit to say, you're coming back, next week we'll also talk about church music. I have found some readings about that as well. But today, I'm going to talk mostly about just music in general. What place does it have in our lives? What does it really mean to engage in music, or many other art forms as well? And that I'm going to open it up to a period of discussion after a certain point. I get tired of talking after a while, and so it's nice to hear your voices as well in sharing your experience, or in sharing in your just reactions to what it is, the world we're in today, and how we can work together for a better tomorrow. I guess the first question is, what is music? We know that it is sound. We know that it can be notated. We know that there are many different kinds of music, and that there is no culture on earth that is without it. Every civilization has some sort of music, or an activity that they call music, that is something that people share, that it brings them together and gives them an avenue for the expression of their feelings about life. One book that I have found tremendously inspiring in this regard has what I think is a stupidly unfortunate title, but that I don't let that get in my way, which is to say that the author of this book says that music is not a thing. Music is not an art form. Music is not just sound waves in space, but that music is a universal human social activity. Music is something that we all participate in one way or another. And he says that the word music should be a verb, and that we should music together. And so the name of the book is Musicking, with a K in the middle, so it looks like a 17th century English title, Musicking. And that to music is something that we really are participating in when we are involved in music. The book, the first chapter, starts out with a few vignettes. And I'd like to read them to you because, again, he's not only talking about classical music, but anything in the world. And that these vignettes give some idea as to what purposes music has been put to, both for good and for ill. And that the idea is that it is something that, again, is in itself, I believe, blameless. But it's a question of what what is being used for that we need to examine. So, in a concert hall, 2,000 people settle in their seats, and an intense silence falls. 100 musicians bring their instruments to the ready. The conductor raises his baton, and after a few moments, the symphony begins. As the orchestra plays, each member of the audience sits alone, listening to the work of the great dead composer. In a supermarket, loudspeakers fill the big space with melodies that envelop customers, checkout clerks, shelf assistants, and managers, uniting them in their common purpose of buying and selling. In a big stadium, 50,000 voices cheer and 50,000 pairs of hands applaud. A blaze of colored light and a crash of drums and amplified guitars greet the appearance on stage of the famous star of popular music, who is often heard on record and seen on video, but whose presence here in the flesh is an experience of another kind. The noise is so great that for the first few minutes of the performance are inaudible. A young man walks down a city street, his headphones clamped across his ears, isolating him from his surroundings. Inside his head is an infinite space charged with music only he can hear. A saxophonist finishes his improvised solo with a cascade of notes that ornament an old popular song. He wipes his forehead with a handkerchief and nods absently to acknowledge the applause of 100 pairs of hands. The pianist then takes up the tune. This is my favorite one. A church organist plays the first line of a familiar hymn tune, and the congregation begins to sing, a medley of voices in ragged unison. All of these portraits are music. They're all different ways in which we experience it, in which we participate it. It goes on. I mean, this is a 500-page book, and so it's quite. I think it's quite wonderful in many ways. But his main premise at this moment, at the end of all this, is to say that music is a universal human activity, as I have said, in which commonly held values are held up, examined, shared, and celebrated. And I think that the power of music to create community is one of its most potent attributes. We do, hopefully, listen to music together, whether or not we're sitting next to each other in a concert hall, and if you open up a candy wrapper, people glare at you, or if you're dancing together in a hall, or if you're singing together in church. There is a sense of community that is fostered by shared musical participation. And so it brings us a question of what is community, and how can we use, or how can we have music be part of the community we wish to have? Understanding that there are so many different musical languages, some of which are completely foreign to us, completely foreign to others. One of the most interesting things about musical criticism, or the history of musical criticism, is the absolute revulsion that new types of music have brought as they are introduced and unfamiliar. You may recall, or I'll tell you, that there is a famous sort of concert piece by Igor Stravinsky called The Rite of Spring. It's a piece that was very primal, and to some degree thought of as being very primitive and transgressive. At its premiere in 1913 in Paris, there was an open riot. People hit each other. People yelled and screamed. The sound of that music hurt their ears so much that it caused a really visceral response. It's anecdotal evidence that the first person, or the person that threw the first blow, was a venerable French composer renowned for his musical conservatism, who was very old at that point and raised his cane. And whether he slipped or whether he meant to hit someone, that was the tinder that lit the fire. We can read so many sermons from the teens and 20s against the evils of jazz and how it would lead young people down the wrong road towards licentiousness and sin. I don't think anymore feel that there is any kind of music that is inherently evil. There is music that we may not choose to listen to on our own. But I don't think, frankly, that there is any music that is without poetry, that is without the human spirit, that is without merit of our trying to find ways to appreciate it. One of the things we've been doing in this course is to examine the whole nature of rhetoric in performance and how it is that our use of phrases, the way in which we speak, the way in which we present ourselves, are a part of performance that are inseparable from the experience of the audience. I teach this course on Fridays. So on Friday, January 23rd, I had to completely change the curriculum of the class because something happened on Wednesday, January 20th, that was too beautiful to ignore. And that was the poetry of Amanda Gorman. That what she presented was so beautiful and so gripping and so powerful, it was important to examine what went into that. How was it that what she did was something that will obviously go down in history as a defining moment? It was a moment at which people, I think, first started to feel hope again after so long of feeling hopeless. So in our rhetoric class, we talked about how she used ancient rhetorical poetic devices in what she wrote. And if you go through it, you see the rhymes, you see the rhythms, you see the figures of speech, you see all the things that she brought that were so easily seen, but she did it so naturally that it was embodied rhetoric, embodied poetry. It was so deep within her. There were other things. She's a beautiful girl. She was dressed beautifully. She spoke beautifully. She moved beautifully in her gestures. And all these things drew us in. And I think that there was a moment where I think the entire nation held its breath as she read that poem. Music can do that. Music is something that can give us the same experience of transcendence. The ancient Greeks thought that music was sorcery because it had no substance. You heard sounds and suddenly felt emotions. How is this possible? That you hear a piece and it makes you feel glad, or it makes you feel sad, or it makes you laugh. This is a very strange phenomenon without the specificity of vocabulary, without being able to say, this piece means X, Y, Z. Of course, vocal music has words, and so there's a little more directness there. But when we're talking about instrumental music, there is a really very difficult situation of how can you pin down exactly what it means? There was a famous saying that writing about music makes about as much sense as dancing about architecture. That it's something that is very difficult to elucidate exactly what there is. At the same time, we all feel it. We all have the experience, we've all had the experience of having music matter to our lives. I think that it's really one of the most wonderful things that I can see of, however you may think of it, the new headphone culture. That the people that are listening to music on their headphones, that music matters to them. That music is something that they need in their lives. It helps them to feel understood. It helps them to feel as though they're part of a larger group. And I think that the power of music to heal in this regard is something we should always keep in mind. So music is a wonderful thing, but what do we do with music? What do we do to music that is both good and bad? I think one of the worst things we can do about music is to rate it, to be able to say, this kind of music is better than that kind of music. I think to be able to say, well, this piece has higher aspirations and is more successful in getting them than another one is one thing. But there has been, in our time, a certain privileging of one kind of music over all else. And that is Western classical music. That it is held up as the highest achievement of mankind. There was a famous moment where, I'm reading now again from Christopher Smart, the claim is summed up by the reported remark of a famous scientist who, when asked which message should be included in a missile to be fired off in search of other intelligent life in the universe, he said, we could send them Bach, but that would be boasting. I think that there is clearly an admiration for the achievements of composers and performers in Western classical music. But what is it that makes it better than anything else? I think that there's a question more of it being ours. Is what we have better than what everyone else has because it's ours? The thing is that Western classical music, well, let's put it this way. I have a professor friend who said it's silly to say that there's a different, to categorize music into classical music and popular music. What we have is popular music and unpopular music. And that when you think that Western classical music consists of less than 3% of world music activity, I think that that by nature makes it unpopular. We have to have music appreciation classes in order for people to understand it now. One of the website things that I'm going to send you is a very long one, but a very good one, called Is Music Theory Racist? And it is a question of how music is taught to undergraduates who are not musicians. Of course, when we're thinking about the entire spectrum of musical activity, we tend first to think about the activities of professional musicians and those for whom music is their life. It's not what they do, it's what they are. I put myself in that category. Obviously, I'm condemned to a life of being a musician, happily so. But what about an average kid from who knows where who's in a musical appreciation class in their freshman year in college? How is music being portrayed to them? How is music being evaluated to them? Up until recently, it was all Bach, Mozart, and Brahms. That it was just, that was what music is. That is what you're taking as a takeaway for the best of what humankind has produced in music. And how fair is that? How comprehensive is that? How diverse is that? I'm going to read a little bit more from Christopher Smart because I think he's so great. The privileging of Western classical music above all other music is a strange and contradictory phenomenon. On the one hand, it is claimed to be an intellectual and spiritual achievement that is unique in the world's musical cultures. On the other hand, it appeals to only a tiny minority of people. even within Western industrialized societies. Classical music records account for only 3% of all record sales. We even see it in the way music, the word music, is commonly used. We know what kind of music is dealt with in the music departments of universities and colleges, and in schools and conservatories. And we know what kind of music a music critic in the newspaper will be writing about. The contradiction extends to the nature of the music itself. On the one hand, it is regarded as the model and paradigm for all musical experience, as can be seen from the fact that a classical training is thought to be a fit preparation for any other kind of musical performance. On the other, it is regarded as somehow unique and not to be subjected to the same modes of inquiry as other music, especially in respect to its social meanings. Scholars of Western music seem to have sensed rather than understood that this is so. But rather than directing their attention to the activity we call music, whose meanings have to be grasped in time as it flies past us and cannot be fixed on paper, they have quietly carried out a process of elision by means of which the word music becomes equated with works of music in the Western classical tradition. I'm going to stop. The point, I think, is that we do ourselves in the world a disservice when we think of music as only one thing. And only that when we're talking about, I remember, of course, hearing other people listen to something and say, well, that's not music. It's a question of, well, you should have said, that's not music to me, and that's my problem. Everything is music to someone. And that the way in which we're able to find musical joy, musical solace, musical grief is something that should be denied to no one. Along with all this are the structures of musical institutionalization. In the 14th and 15th century, music had a huge patron. It was called the church. And that it was through the support of the church that sacred music was born. And that the creation of a large body of repertoire of music that was heard in worship was the direct result of the financial support of the church. In the 17th and 18th centuries, royalty were patrons of music, and that music composers and performers were servants. They wore uniforms provided by their employers and were a very different class than what we would call amateurs. That amateurs were the people that were paying for the professionals to play. Amateur, of course, meaning at its root, the lover of. So an amateur is someone who loves music. And of course, we see in very many published pieces of the 17th and 18th century, very flowery first page letters of thanks from the composer to the patron for supporting them. And there's all this obsequious royal language of my most esteemed, highest, so forth. Bach did this. Every composer who published did this. What is our patron of music today? And I'm sorry to say, it's capitalism. That music is governed by market forces. When we have music that is published or performed on the radio and so forth, it's popularity that wins out. Orchestra boards have to design programs that they think will sell tickets. There need to be, it's the bottom line that is ruling so much within our world today, that it is no less true in classical music as anything else. Whether or not that has brought us to the place where modern orchestras are among the least diverse institutions in the world, I cannot say. It is only in the 50s in the Boston Symphony Orchestra that the first woman was admitted to the orchestra, never mind person of color. Orchestras are notoriously uniform in this regard. And this is something that is being very much addressed and looked at now. One of the articles in my Google Drive that you're going to get is from the New York Times recently that Dan sent to me, actually, saying that this is a big topic of controversy, not controversy. I think, it's a wonderful thing in a way that I think most people who are in positions to make a difference are in agreement that things need to change, and that there has been too long a feeling of complacency around this cultural necessity of inclusiveness and diversity. However, there's a question of, is it going to be diversity in classical music or diversity of classical music? One of the websites I'll be sending you addresses this point very, very specifically, which is to say, we have two issues here. We have the issue of who is playing the music. And the other issue is, whose music are we playing? And that the question of being able to find and celebrate the music of people who, for very easy to see reasons, were not given the same platform as others, is a real joy for most of us to be able to find new music that's great, that happened not to have been access to the same degree of privilege that other composers and other performers have had. And that the question of how it is that we can find ways of being more inclusive and being more diverse is a central question for all of us in every field, not less being classical music. One of the websites has a just absolutely lovely segment on high school in Oakland, California, which has a very high Asian population. And that there is a class in this school that investigates and performs traditional Chinese opera. And they have an orchestra and singers. And for a number of years, their lead singer was a young African-American boy who learned Chinese, learned the gestures and the style, participated in it. And in an interview, he said, "When I am doing this, I feel happy." And that a way of learning to sing each other's songs, to find out that if it made them happy, can't it make us happy too, in one way or another? Of course, the music that we love is there. It's not going to go away. There's never going to be a feeling of this music is coming from a corrupt source. We must get rid of it. We are not, I at least am never going to be a member of the cancel culture when it comes to music, because my feeling is that it can be something that is so purified through our different experiences of it. We do not need to carry its baggage into our living rooms. I think that we can enjoy it for what it does in speaking to us. So that's sort of what I've been doing. I think that it's been a really interesting conversation. The students have been incredibly engaged in it. The system that I've been using has been to give them 2 or 3 readings or 2 readings in a website every week to look at. They then listen, read, and I asking them to journal and to keep notes. And that then we go around the Zoom room and they all speak for 10 minutes or so on what it is that they observed, what it is that they felt, what it is that they learned from the encounter with this material. Some of the things have also been about music education. that the whole question of diversity in music education is something that how it is that we can serve or bring different kinds of music to so many different people. One of the most fascinating articles, and unfortunately also the longest, was written by a Canadian music educator who was talking about the difference between the Indigenous peoples of Canada and the people that are there now. And it was very interesting, for me at least, to read about this whole thing at a slight remove. That it wasn't just talking about what's in our backyard, but what's in somebody else's backyard, which is also in our backyard, but of which we're sort of not aware. And to see that this conversation and this necessity is not just happening here, but it is happening worldwide. And I think that it's just a fascinating moment for us to be able to reassess, to rethink, to re-experience. And I think that it is a rebirth of a certain relationship that we have with music, and therefore also with each other. So I'm looking at my watch. I'm thinking, let's put it this way. I didn't have to practice my prelude this morning because it's going to be an improvisation. So it's not going to be something that I had thought of. I'm just going to put the hymns up and then see what, roll the dice and see what comes out. But at this point, I would like to ask for any reactions, volunteers, and see what other people have to say. And I guess, Lexi, will you moderate us or just ask, I guess, can people unmute themselves?
Yeah, they can. So if you would like to speak, you can go ahead and unmute yourselves and share.
This is reminding me of a fabulous experience I had about maybe 20 years ago when I had the great privilege of taking a trip to Spain and France solely for the purpose of visiting the prehistoric cave art in the presence of somebody who was an expert in it. It was magnificent. And in one of the caves, there were stalactites hanging down, and our guide had a wooden mallet and just gently tapped the different stalactites hanging down. And lo, they each had different tones. And our guide said, well, obviously, when they were in here, they did this. And it was music. It was fabulous. Anyway, so maybe that's the very beginning.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I was very gratified with what you said, and it mirrors my experience. I have a collection of world music CDs, and I really enjoy the different styles. And this includes gospel and many other types of jazz and all. And it is wonderful to be able to enjoy across different musical genres.
Go ahead.
And developmentally, I believe the first rhythm was the heartbeat in utero. That's where we learn, to pace sound and respond to it.
Yeah. And as an appreciator of dance, I have always loved different kinds of dance and different kinds of music. And I especially love the story about the Rite of Spring, because it really is a powerful, powerful piece of music.
And the ballet was booed as well.
And everybody walked out.
Well, yes.
Yeah, Nadinsky got booed.
Yeah.
So this is, I have to take a little bit of exception with some things that were said because, I'm an agitator. None of this was by happenstance, classical music, Western classical music is held up as a pinnacle, and it's a pinnacle of whiteness. And its structure is intentional. Putting it where it is and keeping it where it is not a happenstance. It's absolutely intentional. And by doing this, you've removed women and people of color from working within that genre. You know, if you think about just like, I don't know, any period in history, in Western history, women, you know, were learned to play instruments and learned to compose, but they were little ditties that no one ever took seriously, right? When I was in Barcelona, I was walking through the Gaudi house and they're playing music of one of the daughters. And it was absolutely spectacular. And there was vocal music and I can't find it anywhere. No one's put it anywhere that's where it's recorded or where it can be played, right? African-American people, Latinos, other people had to prove we were good enough, smart enough to understand this, to be able to be taken seriously. Scott Joplin wrote classical music because he didn't want to only be considered a jazz musician, but nobody took it seriously. How many times has Treemonisha been performed? So, I mean, there are lots of things, right? There are definitely far more musical genres that exist than we give respect to, but we have to listen to the voices within classical music that aren't the ones we expect and the ones who haven't been credited to hear what they have to say.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, yeah.
I was interested in this conversation mostly because it seems to be from the point of view of a listener or an observer, as opposed to someone who's actually doing it, performing it. And I enjoy both, of course, but to me, music is making music is the important part of it. And whether it's picking up a recorder and playing it or singing, or this afternoon I'll play with a neighbor in a duet. The music, of course, I have to find something I can play. I can sight read or we can enjoy together. But it can be of any genre. But it's important to be able to know how enough to be able to make music with other people, and that to me is the essence of music.
I'm remembering a couple of years, no, maybe 20 years ago in New York. This is about the attitudes toward classical music. The Port Authority of New York, the big bus station, started playing classical music to drive away teenagers who were hanging out there. And it worked.
I wanted to say, Lindsay, am I interrupting or are you done? I think she's muted. That I had a different kind of experience of music that when I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Korea, which is, now 55 years ago, than in my own culture. And that is singing, making music was like everybody did it. It was a part of life. And, if you went out, any kind of celebration would end with people singing together, and then they would go around and everybody would sing a solo. What I realized, I was 21, I don't know any songs. I would sing along with popular music, but could I stand up and sing a song? No, I fell back on my childhood experiences, and You Are My Sunshine became my song. And of course, and I realized too, listening to people sing, it wasn't whether they were good or bad, but it was just them singing, and you felt closer to them and appreciated them even more. So that was a wonderful but quite different experience. And I'll just add one more thing. Then part of my exposure to Korean culture was Korean classical music, which was, based on something thousands of years ago, other instruments that had grown up and court people played it. And there was no way, I think, a Westerner, or at least a young Westerner, could listen to that and not think this is so weird. And, it is to our ears, but it was also an incredibly high achievement too, but we don't know anything about it unless you happen to go there. So, okay, thanks.
Should mute.
I'd like to just jump in and just say a couple of things. First, I think that one of the persistent problems that we've had is that music has shifted to some degree from having been an activity, as Anne was saying, that everyone could participate, into a commodity, that it is become a product that can be bought and sold. It's something that has, again, then reinforced all of our structures in the way in which it has been packaged and processed and sold to us. And that I think finding a way of reclaiming the activity and community building aspect of it, is, I think, the most important thing we can all try to do. And, again, in anticipation of next week, that's what we can do in church at some point, after which we're able to sing together. The other thing that I wanted to say in terms of Anne's talk about the Korean music, there is a 19th century description from China when there was a worldwide tour of Caruso, Enrico Caruso, the famous tenor, sang in China. And of his singing, when he was there, they said, to us, it just sounded like the barking of a dog. And that I think that the idea of mutual incomprehension is through lack of contact. And that we need to find ways of really listening to each other and to listening to each other's music so that it doesn't sound weird and it doesn't sound like a dog. I mean, there are some tenors that I might say that of, but not Caruso.
Peter, I was reminded when you said that music is a universal human activity, about if you observe babies or little toddlers. Fortunately, I have a granddaughter, right in that genre, and you play different kinds of music for them. My daughter's been experimenting this with a whole group of moms in San Francisco. And they've sort of taken these simultaneous videos. It's pretty cute. Maybe I can share them, playing all kinds of different music with a baby who will pick up the rhythm immediately and shake or do whatever it is and go right into the rhythm. And it can be jazz, it can be, a reggae, it can be Cambodian drums, and it really reminds you that it is, they embody sort of that universal human activity.
If I can just say one more thing, picking up on what Lori is describing. And Peter, you started out by saying everybody sits there motionless in the concert hall, totally silent and all that awful stuff. And many years ago, Fenton Hollander, fellow, ran these wonderful series of concerts on the water in Boston Harbor. So you got on a boat and there was a little chamber group and they would play Bach. Yes, they would play Bach or whoever, and you could bounce around and you could hum and you could move. You could finally move to the music without offending anybody. And it was so wonderful. I can't stand sitting in the concert hall and not even being able to tap my fingers somewhere without bothering somebody, because music is movement.
In terms of the our theology of healing and the aesthetics. And the expressive art therapies, music therapy is the most scientific, the most effective, and probably a great resource. So there is healing in music, not just in clinics, but I think that could be exponentially enlarged over the culture.
I find music very healing. Music literally is my center. When I was growing up, I had two friends, music and television, and I leaned on music for everything. There's music, there's lyrical music in my life. Well, Barry Manilow, you guys all know how much Barry Manilow means to me. There's one of his songs that literally said, "It's going to be okay. Keep going. You've got this." And without that, I would have been completely lost, because that lyric was the first time somebody said, in fact, it was all the time I thought, there's only me. Crazy in a way that no one else could be. If I had just believed in all I had, someone would have said, "You're not so bad." That's the moment I realized I wasn't so bad, that I was okay. But let me cut down short. My whole point is, for me, music is extremely emotional. I grew up on classical music, so I could appreciate the music that I enjoy so much now. Everybody who I listen to grew up and enjoys and listens to classical music in their own time. So being a part of this conversation is very meaningful to me. I'm literally sitting here trying not to cry. And Peter, your music coming into my life has truly, truly, truly been a gift. And I feel very gifted to even have this moment to speak and to hear you teach us once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I put in the chat the URL to the Google Drive folder that has the articles that I was talking about. I'll also send it in the ways through the church channels they have it, but if you want to grab it now and hold on to it, that would be one thing you could do. So,
Peter, what effect is this having on your students? What do they report is changing for them?
Well, first, I mean, it is a question of finding out. I mean, they're finding out more about our musical past that had been obscured, not talked about, not only in terms of the activity of those that had been silenced, but activity of people that are really famous, that we find out that things that they did in their lives or in their careers that were things that are absolutely repugnant to us today. Handel, as an entrepreneur, bought stock in a slave company. That there were 18th century Indonesian slave orchestras that went on tours through the Dutch colonies. That the past has been whitewashed, has been covered over in ways that we need to know, that what we were taught in school is not the truth, or is not the whole picture. And I think that that's given them a new sensitivity and a new awareness. I think that their work together in trying to reach a more diverse audience, and of course, all of this is happening in comparative lockdown. It's a really unfortunate moment, although it does give us a chance to really think seriously about our activity when we are paused from doing it. I told one of the things that was about this class is supposed to be about music performance, and I said at the beginning, I don't want to make this class make you wish you were playing instead. Let's find things to talk about that we can bring to our performances later, but not have it be a poor substitute for the performance. I should also say that the first the midterm assignment was for them to write reaction papers to what has gone on, what went on in the class, and that what they wrote was just glorious. I have to say, musicians sometimes have a reputation for being inarticulate, but the writing and the reflection and the changed viewpoints and the passion that they displayed was really, really, I was humbled by their reactions. That it seemed to me that this was the right thing to have tried this semester. I have no idea what next year is going to be like, how much in person it's going to be, but I'm committed to continuing this curriculum.
Peter, do we have an assignment for next week?
Yes, which is to say you can go into the Google Drive folder,
Okay.
see all of what's there. You don't have to read it all, but maybe one of the things will pique your interest more than another. And that if you want to sort of like talk about it, only one of them so far is about church music. The others are about music education, about performing repertoire, diversity in and of classical music, and also some things by Christopher Smart. I think that your homework is, if you come back, look at a few things, think about a few things. I really, I welcome this dialogue. I realize that I'm not really in a position to talk about any of this, given who I am and what my life has been like. And at the same time, we have to have a dialogue. We have to be able to talk to each other, no matter what position we may otherwise occupy.
Peter, is the YouTube video about music theory in the folder that you shared
Yes,
with me?
it
Yeah.
is. Yeah.
I would highly recommend watching that YouTube video. First of all, it's highly entertaining. And also, it's just so informative about how, like, classical music and music theory has been represented as objective when it hasn't been. It's been very culturally specific. I just really enjoyed the video, Peter. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome. I got the question, is it okay to share what's in the folder? Yes, share it with the world. I stole it off the internet, so why shouldn't you be able to put it around? I will say that, of course, these days in teaching, everything has to be online. We can't even go to the library anymore. And so I've been able to find so many resources, and that some of them have been really useful and gratifying. And of course, we're lucky that so much is online these days. All right. Well, I thank you all for your commitment, your participation. It's wonderful to see you. It's wonderful to hear from you. Let's get together next week and talk some more. And I'll hopefully have some more viewpoints as well.
Thank you.
Much, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, Peter.
We'll be further exploring these topics on our Instagram and Facebook pages this week if you all want to tune in.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter.
Try that, do you think?
Sure.
Okay, so there it is.